Well, well then. Well then. Hello, Astrea.
Hello, Jade.
I know we said we wouldn't talk about Homestuck on this podcast.
Yeah.
And we're not gonna.
Yeah.
But this is the closest point we're gonna get. This is Problem Sleuth by Andrew Hussie.
Yeah, might as well get it out of the way early, right?
Yeah. Have you been enjoying your revisit of Problem Sleuth? Because I know you read this one when we were of the time.
Well, I read part of it of the time. Like a lot of things, I started it and I didn't really finish it. But I read a decent chunk.
Yeah, I'm sort of the opposite of the typical fan. I read all of Problem Sleuth when it was coming out, and I loved it to death. And then when Homestuck came around, I got kind of tired and fell off of it. So I've never finished Homestuck, but I have finished Problem Sleuth. Going back through this one has been it's been a bit of a ride.
It is exactly its moment of the internet in all of the ways good and bad.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Problem Sleuth was released in 2008, and very briefly into New Year's 2009. This happened really, really fast.
That is unbelievable to me. Okay.
Yeah, another creator we've found who's just insanely productive. The back when Homestuck.com was called mspaintadventures.com. Yeah, Problem Sleuth is not actually made in MS Paint; it's made in Photoshop, but it's got a lot of unlike our last topic, Poppy Opossum, which was very illustrative, very elaborate. This is definitely more of a limited animation kind of art style. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if there are shortcuts. If anything, you expect the comic to look much worse than it usually does.
No. I think it absolutely sets you up to think it's going to look worse than it does by the end, too.
Yeah, and when Hussie actually does take the occasional artistic flex, not only does it stand out, it's genuinely very good.
Yeah.
The context in the time period, this was 2008. So, content warning, Problem Sleuth features some words and some ideas that we don't have anymore, that we don't say anymore.
Yeah, a bunch of them.
Yeah, this comic uses the R word quite a lot. But that was in 2008. It was not quite as frowned upon yet.
Yeah.
Content warning for Problem Sleuth. It was 2008.
Yeah, and a lot of tap dancing on the edge of ethnic jokes. Much more literally in that sense in this comic than usual.
Yeah. There's this one skirts the edge of what I would consider edgelord humor. And there's exactly one panel that we have to talk about, one page that we have to talk about, that we'll get to, that is just this is why we hire sensitivity readers.
Yeah.
Okay, so, where to begin? Where indeed? Andrew Hussie is probably best known today as the creator of Homestuck, probably the most influential webcomic of all time. But this is the project that they did before that. Originally released on the MS Paint Adventures forum, ? This is kind of a strange one. It's sort of a precursor to the Ask blog format, where this was sort of a back and forth between the author and the audience constantly, like the regular communication.
See, what's interesting about this, and it's so hard because I found a lot of fragments of what was going on at the time. There's very few archives of exactly what was happening at this moment, but the initial commands for at least a while were on a blog. They were in the replies of a blog. I think it was Problem Sleuth anyway, trying to figure out how to make this format work. And I think he just kind of gave up on the format partway through.
Yeah, so the setup is that Problem Sleuth presents itself as an adventure game.
Yeah.
It has the format of an adventure game. It speaks in second person. You are, you do, you were, etc. And the audience is expected to provide prompts as if you were in an adventure game like Zork or like King's Quest, where they try to quote unquote play or solve the game. The problem is this is not a game. This is a comic with an author and a certain sense of sass about being given directions, which is why it's so much fun to actually read through. Hussie kind of abandons this partway through Homestuck because it becomes clearer that Homestuck is about telling a narrative and not really sort of drops the pretense of being a game that the audience is playing. Problem Sleuth shows how that format is fun and works, I'm kind of glad that Homestuck didn't stay that way. Like it would not work at that scale.
I'm curious how much of the eventuals thing with Homestuck, because Homestuck was a big collaborative project. I mean, this is the problem. Like, this came before Homestuck, but it's going to be hard to not mention Homestuck while we talk about stuff here, because
This is about. I mean, yeah. I mean, I figured we'd do it now because like this is as close as we
Yeah.
can get without actually diving into the entire Homestuck project,
Exactly.
which is a task beyond this podcast.
Yeah.
But so Problem Sleuth did not quite lift off in the same way that its successor did. Probably because it's like small scale. Like
Yeah.
the stakes are small. The characters are very flat. This comic doesn't really do noir proper. It's nominally it is about Problem Sleuth, who is a hard-boiled PI, but it mostly leans on assumptions that the audience has about noir movies from osmosis, like the melodrama, the stark lighting, the camp sexism, the hard-boiled men.
But not just that. Like, the comic's whole structure is all set up in punchline, and the fact that it presents itself as a PI story is part of the setup for a punchline itself, which is that it's not a PI story at all.
How to describe the quote-unquote story of Problem Sleuth? I'm tempted to say there isn't any, but like there is. It's just very thin.
Yeah.
Problem Sleuth is a detective trapped in his office somehow, who comes up with more and more elaborate ways of exploring what appears to be like an escape room office that he has. all kinds of things are hidden under other things. There's like secret codes and teleporters and doorways and magic windows.
Keys, air quotes.
His gun is always turning into a key when he's not looking, and the key is turning back into a gun when he's not looking, as if the game itself is bugged.
Initially, it's if you say key, he uses it like a gun, and if the command is a gun, he uses it like a key.
Yeah, and the audience eventually catches on to this, and then Hussie stops doing it. then they work like they're supposed to. It's kind of fun to watch an author like in this sporting fencing competition with their own audience the whole way through.
It's also fun to see a lot of the tricks that happen with Homestuck happen here first. Really, really, really good and impressive work where Hussie really, 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 really likes messing with what you expect. And then once you expect how he's messing with you, he changes what he's doing again.
It's page 78 was where I first noticed that like every time the audience has quote unquote solved a particular snag, Hussie just introduces more. It's like, why is there a reel-to-reel tape recorder underneath the fucking copy machine? And like after a while you're like, wait a minute, how much of this, like we talk about like punchline setup, it's like how much of this does Hussie actually plan in the moment, like to come around later? And the obvious answer is nothing. Hussie is just very good at improvising like solutions to problems that the audience has almost forgotten about.
This is the kind of thing people say, like, oh, you can't write like this. And it's like, you absolutely can. You
can. It's just very tough. And like, for all the complaints one might have about like middle period and late period Homestuck, Hussie is a good writer and a very good artist.
Interesting how it gets from very simple to increasingly convoluted in every panel.
Yeah, the ability to copy paste as if they were game sprites is a great lean that Hussie can use the whole time. I especially like how on page 145 you see that the Ben Stiller bust has gotten its glasses taken off and it's just got a 1,000-yard bug-eyed stare. That fucking made me scream the first time I saw it.
He keeps finding business cards for things that sound like euphemisms for sex workers.
I would firmly call this comic surrealist.
Oh yeah,
Wouldn't you?
Yeah,
like,
no.
Large stone busts of celebrities seem to be blocking every other door and hallway in this goddamn building.
I mean, it's also surrealist in the sense that, like, you know, if we're really going by the classical definition of surrealism, this entire universe is imaginary.
Yeah, most of the comic takes place in Problem Sleuth's imagination and the imaginations of his friends.
Yes, and I think the entire city is the imaginary version of a real city, but I'll get to that.
How do I actually describe Problem Sleuth to you in terms of structure? It starts out very small. It starts out with just Problem Sleuth in his office trying to find a way out. Eventually, he learns about his neighbors, Ace, Dick, and Pickle Inspector, who are shorter and squatter and taller than thinner than him. They're just these characters have basically zero personality. They don't even speak out loud.
I kind of disagree. They each have stats.
That's true. I forgot about the stat meter.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, this is important for the setup here. This is a game, and they have stats, and these stats determine what they can do, and are implying, hey, this character could do this thing here, this character can do this thing here. I believe the stats that are most important are pulchritude, imagination, and vim. Vim. And each of them has meters that have to be filled with certain resources. You know, it's like if you have imagination, you're capable of, when you're in the imagination zone, which I believe happens when you get really drunk and go under your office desk.
Yeah, you play pillow fort or get inebriated or both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a beautiful panel when they introduce Pickle Inspector's imagination, which is the most complicated art in the entire comic up to this point, to indicate that he is the most imaginative. And once it sort of sets up the back and forth of the audience and the stats and the inventory system, which it forgets about until it doesn't.
This is an inventory adventure game, somehow. As somebody who had played an awful lot of adventure games and like text adventures at this point, Hussie does capture like the crazed surrealism of adventure game logic very, very well.
Yeah.
Like, when Problem Sleuth stumbles into this back room that has nothing but a piano and a bunch of portraits of old jazz musicians whose instruments are missing, but like if you look below each one's plaque, each one has an assigned instrument like to recover, and like literal physical instruments that you are supposed to give to paintings to open a door. Like, who the fuck?
It's a bad adventure game too.
It's a bad adventure game, but also like an awful lot of adventure games are just like this. Especially during the time period. There's a throwaway Grim Fandango reference in this comic where like Problem Sleuth uses the Calavera scythe and Manny Calavera shows up. And it just makes me think like, yeah, Grim Fandango is a very good adventure game. It also has all the problems that old adventure games did, and I feel like Hussie must have played these a lot.
Yes. Contrary to what the internet thinks, the Myst games were actually more sensible than those games were. Anyway.
Problem Sleuth is a game made firmly in the Sierra mold, where you can die early, often, and arbitrarily.
I think even more than Sierra, it reminds me of a bunch of like Sierra clones.
Yeah. The other biggest vibe of this one I got was the Infocom Hitchhiker's Guide game, which if anybody out there has not played, homework for you, audience. Find the Infocom adventure game, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, based on the book. I believe you can play it for free now. And just try to get out of the first room alive. Grown men have wept at trying to solve those puzzles. They are so sinister.
That's just a skill issue. I figured that out when I was 10. Yeah.
Oh, bullshit. You used to walk through like everybody else. So after Problem Sleuth and his two impromptu friends, begin imagining their ways out of the office, they eventually come to learn about the existence of Mobster Kingpin, our big bad for the story, and who is also trapped in his office.
Yes!
Who has also been trying to get out of his office for like the last 4 hours. And is also like on his own little weird vision quest of getting really coked up on candy and going into his imagination for.
Because there's also a detail about this that I was not actually thrilled about, which is all of the diabetes jokes.
There's an awful lot of diabetes jokes.
Yeah. Which is a thing I know. At least one friend of mine has a really big issue with having diabetes. Over and over and over again. And yeah. And that's just when it's like, wait, is this even film noir anymore? If they're going on, like, you know, the much more explicitly King's Questy medieval fantasy world of the weasels and elves?
You are only periodically reminded that Pickle Inspector and Problem Sleuth and A-Stick are supposed to be hard-boiled detectives, because periodically the narrator will pop into that stock voice. It's like, yeah, see?
Yeah. I mean, there's Tommy guns. I guess.
There's Tommy guns, there's whiskey, there's coffee, there's smokes. There's an old-time telephone with the Lucky Charms symbols instead of numbers.
Each of the elements gets introduced, which has certain principles, and the world's logic is incredibly consistent about these symbols.
Which is funny, because it sure doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, that's because instead of just like contradicting how something worked, he'll just introduce a new thing.
there's also the fun metaphysical thing, metatextual, I guess. Well, I guess metatext is metaphysics for these characters. Is that not only are they aware that they're in a game, they can cheat. Page 600 is Problem Sleuth literally logs onto the internet and looks at the game facts page for his
the
own
game
game.
facts page is incredible.
That was incredible. It's like, oh, game facts doesn't look like this anymore. Oh, that threw me back to a very specific moment in time.
There's non-cheat ASCII art, like art made of text. Like,
When was the last time you saw that?
And also the implication too that they did not go according to the route of the game.
No,
because
they very clearly do some skips.
Yes, because there are a whole bunch of things in the guide that are just entirely skipped, and the seeming end of it is not the end of the game. Because I'm pretty sure it's because Mobster Kingpin is not playing the game properly.
And partway, how do I even this comic structure? See, I almost called it a game.
Yes,
I got it mixed up. At some point, at first she starts to throw away joke that hysterical dame, who is just Problem Sleuth with long hair and a different outfit, is also trapped in her office, which starts as a throwaway gag that someone else just happens to be going through the same predicament that he is. Later on, turns into a full-fledged character because not only is she Problem Sleuth's female alter ego, everybody in the universe has their own female alter ego, whether imaginary or real or not.
Yes.
Absolutely wild how many characters start to form out of one-off jokes.
When they're introduced, it's earlier in the timeline.
Yeah, there's a timeline in this story too.
There's multiple timelines, including the fact that the story is recursive.
Yeah, and at one point there are 3 ace dicks at the same time.
Yes, because Ace Dick can't imagine being a girl.
No.
So there's just another one, but also due to a cheat code, there's a glitch that creates a second Ace Dick in addition to that. So there's 3 Ace Dicks at one point.
Yeah, I remember that line specifically. It says, "You're not sure why, but you think this means there are now 3 ace dicks running around."
God, how many pickle inspectors are there by the end?
An infinite number of
yes,
pickle inspectors.
Right, an infinite number of pickle inspectors, including Godhead Pickle Inspector, who retroactively creates the universe.
There is no fourth wall, not for us and not for the characters either.
Yes,
they quite regularly escape into reality, our reality, and then go back in.
Yes, I mean they literally are like also breaking the fourth wall through the windows, because there are windows into the imaginary city. You go through the window to physically go into the imaginary city, as opposed to imagining yourself in the imaginary city.
Where are we going with this fucking story?
I
think it's worth explaining that Problem Sleuth is like a weird like screwball like thrill ride of a comic, but like wow, it's long for what it is, for how little character interaction there actually is, for like how little character dialogue there actually is. This comic's about 1,600 pages. I feel like it could have been 1,000 easily.
Oh yeah.
It really drags when you get to like the last third. It's like they just add more and more and more stuff's going on, and it does get suitably more epic and like grander in scope, but ooh, wow! I started to glaze over partway through.
Well, I mean, part of it is it does feel like it's glazing over partway through, even like being written, because it's like, oh, they have a fight. Around
the time that they start scaling the Mega Man style challenge tower, and and the story becomes mostly JRPG combat, and the adventure game stuff kind of takes a step back by the wayside for increasingly crazier anime attacks.
Yes.
That's like, okay, this is not a tonal shift, not a style shift, but an attitude shift, I guess I'd say.
It also like, it shifts to this because I think that's easier to write, but also was way less, I think it's less funny at that point because it's harder to do the setup of, oh, you think this is going to work like this, when it's just like, no, here's just a mechanic you've never heard of before.
Here's a mechanic you haven't heard before. Here's the etiquette monstrance where
Yes.
you have to fill your etiquette monstrance with whatever the fucking resource is. Ace Dick has had enough of it and just pulls it off the interface and beats a weasel to death. I really appreciated that. Yeah, this would be a hell of a stoner read. So there's a running gag. Time to talk about some problematic things. There's a running gag in this comic, several actually, but one of them is that Problem Sleuth keeps bumping into these strange murals that seem to be painted everywhere. And like
Yes.
they usually depict like racial harmony, communities full of diverse people, cooperation, etc. And like it's
Yeah.
not clear if you're supposed to find them charming or funny or weird. They just seem to be painted in places they shouldn't be. And Problem Sleuth the character has this strange revulsion to these objects. It's not explained why, but it does lead, like, as this joke stacks up, it gets stranger and stranger that like this like fairly mundane depiction of racial harmony upsets Problem Sleuth so much. It's weird on its face, but then we get to page 769 where, quote, the wall behind you is infested with ethnic diversity and good
Yes,
cheer.
yes,
Jesus Christ, Hussie, do not write that. Infested? Is that the verb you had to use? Oh my god.
Yeah, not to like rewrite it, but you could have just made it infested with like mediocre public art or something. Yes, because like before that, like the jokes seemed to be like, hey, here's this sort of generic, this generic, well-meaning public art project thing. Which is how I read it as, an art.
Or like the complaint would be like, oh, it's tacky, and like that Michael's live, laugh, love way. It has no teeth. It has
exactly.
No point. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I thought was the joke until it's like, I
was like, oh wow.
Like, I thought it was a joke like, oh, the Bean in Chicago. Like,
if the Bean were following Problem Sleuth around somehow, that'd be really funny.
That'd be a really good joke, yeah. And that's what I thought it was.
No, they do it this way. There's a couple of uncomfortable racial moments in this comic.
Yes.
Where, like, there's Fiesta Ace Dick, who is, like, just Ace Dick powered by hot sauce, which... Hussie, like, I feel like Hussie had the realization partway through that like these weird ethnic jokes weren't funny, and so it started to avoid them. And specifically points out, it's like, yeah, this silly ethnic shit's gonna get real old real fast. And I was like, you could have had that revelation before you started writing this. That would have been nice.
Yeah, no, and and those things did jump out at me because for something from 2008, from mostly Something Awful users, it's not wildly misogynist with the women in it.
Like, no, the only real example is like when Mobster Kingpin smacks one of the girls over the face. That's clearly marked as his villain moment, and they all hate him from that moment on.
Like the women have way too much agency for a lot of people on the internet today. Yeah. Weirdly,
yeah. I mean, they're not characters either. They're just
yeah, but nobody's a character.
The only real character is the narrator themselves. The narrator also features like the Hussie staple of stopping and explaining for a long period.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Homestuck has a lot of that. Trying to explain this nonsense gonzo plot in like long paragraph form because some people have joined the comic way late and are trying to get it explained to them here in the moment.
I appreciated that. I'm gonna be honest. I appreciated that, especially when there were 5 pickle inspectors flying around, including.
Oh, I bumped right over those. I didn't care. It's like, these plot points aren't going to come back. I wouldn't even call them plot points.
Except some of them did. And yeah, no, the scale goes from, hey, how do I get out of my office, to this boat has a steering wheel that turns the universe. The boat is always the same place, but the universe spins around the boat. Unless you get like high enough, in which case it's like the other gravity. It's so weird.
And another staple of Hussie's art is very strong use of like limited animation techniques. Like you can start seeing this in the back half where Hussie starts using like a lot more smear animation, a lot more. There's a great technique on page 865 with this GIF of Problem Sleuth firing the gun at Demon Head Mobster Kingpin, just trying to pop open this enormous metal mask he has. Where not only is it's a GIF. So it's animated. Problem Sleuth slides from the left to the right, and like there's this flashing animation.
Yeah.
That is a classic Johnny Quest technique. If you've ever seen Johnny Quest,
Oh
the
yeah.
the animators would like add energy to otherwise still scenes by having Johnny like slide into frame like on 2 feet without actually moving any of the cells. That's a great way to add energy with relatively little effort.
And yeah, it totally does. Hussie is doing a lot of stuff here that later becomes like Homestuck staples, and is just like why he was so good at this medium.
Continuing my great theory of the animation backlash, where if you aren't going to get a job in the industry, make a webcomic.
Yes, like they understand what you can do with a web page in a way a lot of other web comics, almost none did.
Hussie is one of those people who like can break the format very, very well. Like suddenly the panel is like an entire column, sort of expanding on the endless canvas idea.
Yes.
I feel like
I mean,
I feel like Hussie could do that effectively.
like yeah, I was flashing back to my late high school, early college Scott McCloud.
Were you also thinking of Pup contemplates the heat death of the universe?
No, actually, I was thinking of McCloud's complaints that like why are webcomics vertically oriented? Because screens aren't.
Well, they are now.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
When McCloud wrote that.
Yes, no. But what I mean is, I'm like, this is old enough that it matters, which is that these pages are written with the web in mind. Like, that's not like, oh, you have to scroll this. I wrote this assuming you'd see this like a page in a book. No, you're looking at the computer. And there's a couple cases where the actual art is so big you can't see it on the screen, and it builds a sense of movement not by like, oh, I went from this panel to this panel to this panel, but you literally physically cannot see the bottom of the panel. So there's a couple times when people are dropping.
It's great.
This is kind of genius. Like, I'm sure this didn't originate the technique, but it's just so different than almost everything else at the time, which is just like, hey, here's the comic page. Maybe I'll like a physical comic, especially newspaper comics. That's a weird thing about old web comics. They're newspaper comics.
Yeah, I have the complete Kevin and Kel on the bookshelf behind me. I was like, wow, I haven't read a comic in this format in ages.
And yeah, but this is like the rejection of that from using HTML as the language itself, from the way that the text commands are the next link to the chat box outside the panel itself, explaining the text in the adventure game like manner.
And like Hussie uses a lot of like reliable Flash techniques, because that was also something you could do back in 2008. You could watch Flash animations on the internet. There's a page 1083 has the little gif of the candy corn vampire just popping up like it's an old shareware Halloween Flash game. Oh, it reminds me of like middle school, just looking at this shit.
Oh yeah. This is so Newgrounds core right
it's
here.
It's very Newgrounds core. It's got like an old Cartoon Network edge to it too.
Yeah. I mean, everything did. Everybody wanted to be Cartoon Network and Invader Zim. That sequence also has the pumpkin joke, which I'm sure you Homestuck fans out there will appreciate that was a ongoing gag.
What pumpkin? Doesn't that begin like way earlier in like Bard Quest or something?
It's literally the first thing. In the very first one, there's a pumpkin on a table, and the first command is get pumpkin, and it's what pumpkin? Yeah, which lives on as the name of a company that will definitely one day release a game that's not.
In their defense, they did get conned.
They did.
and lost most of their money.
They got conned. Then Hussie didn't know how to run a game company, and then it was retooled from scratch, and then Hussie went off to do other stuff, and I don't think there's a lot of money or will in the project anymore. But it is very much like, this sure fell apart.
I think it's just one of those cases where, like, Hussie is at their best when they are writing silly, insane stories.
Yeah.
And, like, the further they get from that idea, like, the less experienced they are and, like, the less confident they are. It's going to sound weird. Although Hussie is one of, like, the only people who did make an enormously good career over a webcomic, several webcomics, this is, like, the extreme rarest case. Like,
yeah,
most webcomics don't even get like merch, let alone a successful media empire ?
I think A lot of it was the timing because like this was like about as late as you could be and have a webcomic that wasn't like the current sort of like art quality arms race that they kind of turned into eventually.
With all the recaps, especially, I just started to. I've mentioned I started to glaze over the comic in like the back half, but around the time we meet the three dapper gentlemen who are also Problem Sleuth, A-Stick, and Pickle Inspector in other different outfits, who are also in love with their female counterparts, but for different reasons, because they are attending a pornographic film studio where the thing is to watch women clean surfaces, to watch women clean surfaces in an erotic way. When that started to happen, I just sort of it's like you take a sip of your coffee, you take a step back, you get up from the chair, and just like, the story I'm reading is real fucking weird.
Yes, I mean, I loved the stripper pun.
They also have to wear these time-space bodices or bodices.
Yes.
Where, like, if you pull it on one side, you become fatter and thinner, and if you pull it on the other side, you become taller and skinnier. And you will use this to compensate for the gravity well of a supermassive black hole.
Created by another bodice.
Yeah, an even more intense bodice.
Yes, which keeps getting squeezed to the point that there's a singularity.
Eventually, all of these weird tangents climax in like the final boss fight in a flying pirate ship in the middle of outer space against Demon Head Mobster Kingpin, who is like a three-part classic JRPG boss with multiple forms, multiple phases, multiple strategies to try and beat him. Strategies in big quotes here because
yes.
like it's a comic. Nobody actually wins anything.
And the bit where every time they deplete the meter in order to actually do the damage, there's an exposed weak point you have to hit.
A strange tangent where they actually just play the Oregon Trail for a bit.
God, what a weird fucking comic. Yeah, like,
I know, right? I'm sorry to the audience if we seem like we're going around in circles and in strange directions. Reading Problem Sleuth is just like that.
Yeah, it's really they're
we
almost
can't really give
page.
you a structured discussion this time because like what structure there is in this comic is just tied in a pretzel knot on purpose.
Yeah.
That said, like it's not without its motifs and its themes.
Yeah.
The story. The number 3. Hussie fucking loves the number 3, I guess. Everything comes in sets of 3 in this story. There's our 3 protagonists, our 3 female deuteragonists. You always got to do things in sets of 3.
I mean, it's very good joke structure because you have setup, beat, punchline over and over and over again with each character. Because like, hey, here's 2 detectives and Pickle Inspector. And then, like, oh, here's Problem Sleuth's girl version. Here's Pickle Inspector's girl version. And then A-Stick just imagined another A-Stick.
And then, like, they start adding... Then that joke starts to get, like, more elaborate as things start coming in sets of 8, like the honey hives.
Yes.
Have to be where, like, they start running out of... There's, like, the pitcher and then the goblet that you have to fill with the magic honey and the magic fluids. And then, toward the end, they start running out of containers, so they describe things as suckle ramekins.
Yes, suckle ramekins.
The suckle ramekins.
For the jocose honey.
The jocose honey. What is jocose?
Jocular, silly.
Oh,
yeah.
Comedy.
I think it would be worth talking about that for a minute. Is how much it does like using weird words, like the spoon deluxe, like
spondulix.
Spondulix. Yeah, no, that's.
I love the word spondulic. It's terrible.
Yes, it's an archaic term for currency.
Is it?
Yeah. I looked up every time there's some weird word. I looked it up and I was like, I hate that this is exactly describing whatever the situation is. Like pulchritude.
It means charm or like panache, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like charisma.
Every single time it introduces a word like that, it is entirely 100% accurate to the situation. It is very appropriate. And it sounds ridiculous, including the introduction of abscond.
And also, A-Stick never makes those jokes. A-Stick has no imagination and is not good with words. To the point where even when death itself shows up with the game of life, to not do anything fancy, not duel for souls, the irony of it is lost on A-Stick's imagination that death wants to play the game of life. And then A-Stick's game of life becomes really like deep and emotionally intense. He marries a plastic woman and has a plastic child who gets shot in a plastic drive-by shooting.
See, that was the kind of edgy joke I kind of liked. Yeah, well, not kind of liked. I'm laughing. You could hear me laughing.
While A-Stick sets up this rather complicated board game for the game of life.
Yes. Whereas Pickle Inspector, I believe, solves like a four-dimensional fractal Sudoku.
Pseudocube. The
Pseudocube.
cube.
Yeah.
You know that cube like the back of your hand. Literally.
I don't know how much more there is to say about this thing.
I have a few things.
Yeah, okay, you do. Okay.
Like there's the insensitivity. There's the fact that in 2008 some jokes were more acceptable than they are now. What did you think of the gender in this comic? Because there's an awful lot of confused messages about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's hysterical dame, right?
Hysterical dame, nervous broad, and then A-Stick has no.
Yeah, and then and then nervous broad.
Like it's again, I say like it's camp sexism. Like this is a lot of it is for a gag. And like you're not like I don't think there's any like real misogyny taking place here because who are these characters? The men are not any more characterized than the women are.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I don't think it hit me that much because like when I'm looking for this kind of thing, I generally take a look at like, is this, where's the agency here? Is this attempting to like, oh well, I wrote this fictional character in such a way that like there's a whole plot reason for why she's in the horny outfit, which is sort of true in this one, except there's nothing sexy about it.
Yeah, there's nothing remotely sexy about these outfits or this art style.
Yes, including like eventually the corset just becomes a practical thing that Mobster Kingpin starts using, and it's not a cross-dressing joke. The joke is that if it compresses you every time you pull it, eventually you become it eventually becomes a black hole.
You drop past your Schwarzschild radius.
Thank you for telling me what that is, Gunbuster. But it is weird because like it has a lot of stuff about the quote whores
who never do any whoring.
Yes, no, they're just there, and the brothel in the sky.
Yeah, but like nobody has sex at the brothel in the sky.
Yeah,
no one seems to do much of anything in the brothel in the sky.
Yeah, it's all elements that are introduced as like evocative. Especially in retrospect, there definitely seems to be some gender thoughts going into a lot of these comics. Yeah, that are like unexamined.
I pick up on what I think might be an intentional motif that A-Stick might be gay, because not only can A-Stick not imagine a feminine counterpart, when the gentleman version of A-Stick is looking into the sky with his fancy opera binoculars, he is looking at Fiesta A-Stick jiggling his tummy.
Yes,
and I was like, is that a bear joke?
Yeah, but he also has like the heterosexual, but it's also a parody of heterosexual relationships. Like it is with the game of life. It's weird. Like there's definitely gender in the comic, but it's not quite what I would expect from just straightforward gender jokes, or the like way a lot of comics from this era would be like, hey, here's the one cool girl who's always being angry at all the sexist jokes we already made. Like in every single webcomic at this point had that. All of them. Every single one. She's cool. She plays video games.
She's just one of the guys.
Yeah. She's more comfortable with sexuality in a way that says that she's also not going to have sex with you. Or will. And when the story arc, when, the guy's like, no, we got to get these characters married.
Once things get cool.
Yeah, but this doesn't do that. Like, this comic is utterly sexless.
Which is actually kind of rare in webcomics for there to be no sexual angle.
Hussie earlier, there's like some of Hussier's earlier webcomics have a lot of really like even more gross, unfortunate humor. I forget the exact name of it, but there's a lot of racially charged jokes in like one of the immediate predecessors to the MS Paint adventures.
There's I don't remember which page it is, but there's a bit in Problem Sleuth where like there's a porno magazine called Black Inches, which is whoa.
Yeah.
Maybe don't.
Just reference the Mr. Show taint bit. That's always safe.
Yeah, it's there's lots of jokes we don't make anymore in Problem Sleuth. And I feel like if we go back much further than this, we'll get to worse things.
Oh yeah,
So look forward to that.
Yeah, wow.
Whenever our podcast gets to that side. Talking of like meta text, I think there is some commentary in Problem Sleuth having like the most overpowered attacks, and like them being cloaked in like the language of liberalism and democracy. Like they're all about diplomacy and organizing cooperative exchanges, and they all involve shooting people to death with bullets and chopping them up with swords.
Yes.
I was like, there might be some commentary there. I'm not sure. Politics didn't exist until 2014, though. So
it's a joke. This was really common at the time, like in the joke that negotiation is killing stuff. Like that's a thing in the comic I'm thinking about called Darths and Droids, which I don't know if
read that one.
Yeah, where like every time they get a blaster, it's like, oh, we need those for diplomacy, and that was just a very common nerd joke from this era. Yeah, before writing was invented. Well, for nerds anyway.
Yeah, nerds did not learn how to write for the longest time. That said, that there is. I know that the fat jokes aren't great, but I did laugh on page 1553 of quote that ludicrous battleship you call an ass.
Hussie is very good at sentences. Hussie's phrasing sticks in the mind.
All the angels who dance on the head of a pin, or rather, a kingpin. That's a hell of a wind-up.
Yes, that joke is set up for so long.
You pop the scope back in the wheel and steer like man-possessed. You mature the ultimate steer tech. Chauffeur's reckoning. A man, a wheel, a dream. That's such a Hussie quote. I love it.
But yeah. I mean, like at the end, you can sort of just summarize it with, and then there was a big fight, and a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah. A lot of stuff happened despite not very much happening.
Exactly. Like, it's just like, we're still just having a fight. And there's all of these, and some of the long-running jokes come back.
There is a certain emotional resonance to it, too. No, they're not very established characters, if at all, but, like, you did spend 1,600 pages with them. Like, you do get attached to them just because, like, they seem like the people to root for.
Yeah. I mean, Problem Sleuth and Pickle Inspector both seem to be trying to basically do well by people.
And then by the time we get to the epilogue, it's just become the Homestuck art style. Straight to it.
The gears for Homestuck are turning in Hussie's head, like the ways it's different than this. Because reading this, the thing that really struck me was, what if that the biggest difference between this and Homestuck, like the single biggest difference, is that Homestuck is this. It's this kind of escalation, this kind of gag, but with character drama. And that's the big addition that Homestuck makes to this. Because all the other pieces are here. Every piece is here.
It's just that there are no characters in Problem Sleuth, per se.
And immediately in Homestuck, that is reversed, and we have a character. We have John Egbert, and the big change in the format is chat logs, where you have the characters talking over instant messages, and the lack of that was, in retrospect, felt very profoundly by me, because there's a lot of ways that can add to what this is doing, because
did.
Yeah. And that was like the missing piece of the puzzle that made Homestuck, I think, why that one got bigger, was because not only do you have all of these innovative techniques, not only do you have all of this understanding of the medium that gets perfected in Problem Sleuth, but you have that surfacing an actual story.
We're not going to have that conversation. Not on this show.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to see part one of this. And then also how this is like part one of Undertale, because so many of these techniques get used in Undertale.
An awful lot of people, I think we mentioned this last time, but an awful lot of people on the Homestuck project end up going into Undertale and Deltarune.
Yes, because Hussie was not doing all of the art in Homestuck by the end, and definitely wasn't doing the music.
And hell, maybe we'll play Delta and Undertale for this bit too, because I maintain that Undertale at least is just a 2010s webcomic in video game form.
Yeah, no, it's the format and the consistent usage of you is used in a different way in Undertale. No spoilers, but like the you that voice, the narrative voice.
Yeah, it's second person voice.
Yeah, is how it is presented. This is like it's very, very strange seeing this inflection point for such a huge part of modern internet culture that itself is not really thought of that. It's just, it's Homestuck that did this. Like, well, Homestuck wouldn't exist without this.
It's almost like art history is a succession of exchanges. What a ride. What a thrill ride of a comic this is.
Yeah.
There are an awful lot of cameo appearances in here. There's a not Kate Beaton cameo appearance.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm pretty sure that's just Kate Beaton in a different pen.
Yes.
Or it's somebody impersonating her very well.
Yeah. It's also for that particular era, like it's kind of like Kate Beaton is very well respected, but it's very funny thinking about how much Hark a Vagrant was just completely ubiquitous at this point.
Yeah.
Like, everybody read Hark a Vagrant. Everything started with Homestuck. Well, not Homestuck. Problem Sleuth.
Everything started with Problem Sleuth. And hanging out on Something Awful and Penny Arcade and just being friends for a bit until they decide to take another step. It sounds like a strange and like fantastical understatement. No, art just works that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you found it. Problem Sleuth comes with its own science FAQ section.
No,
the universe of Problem Sleuth is just lousy with science. This phrase can serve to suggest either it is chock full of science or that it is terribly inaccurate with science, depending on your perspective, end quote. And then there's a bunch of things here to like actually explain the strange like cartoon physics that it does. I'm not sure what I think of this page. It's like, why are you bothering to explain the scientific inconsistencies in your fucking comic where like a bunch of cartoon detectives blow up a final boss character? Like, why does this matter? This speaks to like a kind of weird insecurity, like in a way that like was kind of pervasive about this is also something that we might talk about in the future, but like there was a weird antagonism between webcomic readers and webcomic writers that Problem Sleuth kind of plays with, but like for a lot of other webcomics, people were kind of at odds with a very demanding audience. Like that's something that Everett ran into last time when we talked about Poppy Opossum.
Yeah.
In like a bad way. But like webcomic fandom kind of held its creators to strange scrutinous standards, especially at this time period. I'm not really sure why.
I mean, everything was like that was a big changeover, I think, in the internet was, well, now you can all talk about it and you can like analyze it and you can examine it. You have the whole thing, a whole bunch of people can see it, and if you can see a webcomic, you can talk about the webcomic.
Yeah, and if you can see the webcomic creator, you can approach the webcomic creator and make strange demands.
And 2008 is like we're 5 years into there's comments at the bottom of every article at this point.
Yeah.
Which, and you know, there's still very active forum discussion. 2008, Twitter and social media are starting to sort of claw into what they are now, and probably won't be in 5 years. Which even goes back to the 60s with all the letters to Marvel Comics and saying, with the inconsistency, which became the, if you can explain it, you get the no prize.
Yeah, the Marvel no prize, which is really, that's, I don't know if anybody even remembers that. That's before my time, but I do like the Marvel no prize for how sassy it is.
Yes.
If you successfully pointed out a logical inconsistency in a Marvel comic, they would send you the no prize, which is just an empty envelope.
Yes. Which they did, because nerds complained they didn't actually win the no prize. Initially, the joke was just, yeah, you won no prize. It was just supposed to be a little Stan Lee-ism.
Wink and Stan. But that is Problem Sleuth. Despite saying quite an awful lot about it, and despite reading an awful lot of it, very little seems to happen, and yet it sticks in my brain
Yeah.
very, very strongly.
So much of it's the art. So much of it's the art.
So much of it is the art style. So much of it is going back to this moment, like just before the turn of the decade, to see how to see like the early roots of other things that would become infinitely popular on the internet.
Before you mentioned it, I hadn't even thought of this as like the progenitor of the S-Blog format, but it totally is.
Where like the antagonism between reader and writer is kind of fun.
I mean, I also even kind of like the antagonism between reader and writer, because I think a lot of times, like now, everything is about like, hey, you, the honored fan, who I do everything for you, and that's the most important thing.
I kowtow to you. I prostrate myself before you, because if I don't, you won't give me money. And there's no way to make money on the internet, apparently.
We should talk about that someday, but we'll figure out how. Yeah,
we will, perhaps. I'm not sure how. What should we talk about next time?
Oh,
because I have a few things here on the list. Some of them are long, some of them are short. I don't know about you, but I kind of want to go into totally uncharted territory for myself next time.
Interesting, yeah.
T.H.E. Fox might be a good pick if you want to go all the way back to the early age.
It is all archived.
I've never actually gone that far back. That would be interesting. Let's try that.
Let's try that. Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning on episode 4.
T.H.E. Fox from 1986. It's older than I am.
It's older than I am. It was published on CompuServe.
Wow. Even I'm too young for CompuServe.
Yeah. That's before there was a World Wide Web.
It was just a web.
Yeah.
It wasn't even worldwide yet. But I guess that's for next time. Where can people find you, Astrea?
You can find me at Automatic Tiger on X. Although I mostly just reblog art there. If you want to actually see things I say, co-host is the best place to find Automatic Tiger. I'm on Blue Sky. We all love that one.
Yeah,
Automatic
I'm
Tiger
also on
there,
Blue Sky now. You can find me at Cups of Jade most places. I have a link tree if you would like to look for that. It's just a list of everywhere I post, because that's all the internet is anymore. Is just lists of places to go and consume content. I love it. I don't love it. I'm tired. Thank you for talking with me about webcomics, Astrea. I really like doing this.
Yeah, thank you for talking with me about webcomics, Jade. I really like doing this too.
Where?
Well,
see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.